July 15th, 2023 marked the 35th annual Portland Summer Arts Festival, long established as the crown jewel of New England's cultural calendar. But this opening night at the Thorne Gallery would begin a countdown to something far more sinister than art. By 7:43 p.m., the marble floors of the 1892 Victorian mansion-turned gallery reflected the sparkle of champagne glasses and the shimmer of evening wear as Portland's elite gathered to witness what critics had dubbed the most anticipated installation of the decade. Olivia Blackwood's latest piece, unveiled at 8:15 p.m., dominated the main hall, a towering monument of preserved materials that seemed to pulse with its own life force. The installation, which she had begun constructing on June 1st, drew gasps of admiration. The critics were rapturous, the collectors intrigued, and the socialites eager to be seen in its presence. Yet something about the piece made viewers uneasy if they looked too long, as if some ancient instinct was warning them about what lay beneath its perfectly preserved surface. None of them knew they were admiring a tomb. Detective Maya Patel, attending the opening in an unofficial capacity, noted something strange in the artist's tone. In her 12 years with the Portland Police Department, she had learned to trust such instincts. As an art history graduate turned detective, she recognized the technical brilliance of the preservation work, but something felt off about the way Olivia spoke about absence and decay. The summer of 2023 had begun with record-breaking temperatures, and July showed no signs of cooling. As humidity crept through the gallery's ancient walls, Olivia watched her masterpiece with the patience of a woman who knew that time reveals all secrets. She alone noticed the first signs: minute changes in texture, subtle shifts in the chemical composition that only a master restorer would recognize. The piece explores the intersection of preservation and decay, she told the admiring crowd, each word carefully chosen. How we desperately try to hold on to things that are meant to fade away. Her eyes drifted to the empty spaces where Wesley and Lucia should have stood, their absence explained away with tales of European art acquisitions. Detective Patel couldn't have known that in exactly 20 days, on August 4th, she would be standing in this same spot, facing the most elaborate crime scene of her career. By then, the record-breaking heat wave would have done its work, and Olivia Blackwood's masterpiece would reveal its grotesque secrets to the world. For now, the installation stood pristine, its secrets safely entombed in preservation fluid and chemical compounds. But like all buried truths, like all preserved moments, it was already beginning to decay. The heat wave forecasted for early August would see to that. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Olivia remained before her creation. Time, she whispered to the silent gallery, is all it takes. Above her, the ancient ventilation system hummed, struggling against the summer heat, while inside her masterpiece, the first microscopic bonds began to break. The Portland Summer Arts Festival had officially begun. In 20 days, it would end with screams. To understand the tragedy that unfolded in August 2023, we must first meet the three individuals who stood at the center of Portland's art world. Their story began 15 years earlier, in 2008, with an ambitious man named Wesley Thorne. At 42, Wesley Thorne had built his reputation on an almost supernatural ability to spot talent in unknown artists. Standing at 6 feet tall with salt and pepper hair and a disarming smile, he cut an impressive figure in Portland's social scene. His purchase of the Morrison Walsh Mansion on Western Promenade during the 2008 financial crisis marked his first major victory, paying just $1.2 million for what would become Maine's most prestigious gallery space. Enter Olivia Blackwood in 2010. At 38, she was already a rising star in art restoration, having completed a coveted fellowship at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. With her precise hands and analytical mind, Olivia could save paintings others had declared beyond hope. Her signature achievement came in 2016 with the restoration of Lost Harbor, a priceless painting of Portland's waterfront that had been damaged in a fire. Where others saw ash and ruin, Olivia saw possibility, a trait that had drawn her and Wesley together. Their wedding in 2017 merged more than just their lives. It created a powerhouse in the art world. Wesley discovered the talent, and Olivia preserved it for posterity. The Thorne Gallery became synonymous with both innovation and preservation, hosting exhibits that drew collectors from across the eastern seaboard. The dynamic duo became a trio in the autumn of 2019, when Lucia Ramos held her first exhibition in Portland's Old Port. At 36, Lucia brought a fresh perspective to architectural photography. Born in Madrid but raised in Boston, her work captured the soul of New England's historic buildings through a distinctly European lens. Her series on Portland's Victorian mansions caught Wesley's eye, leading to a commission to document the Thorne Gallery's renovation. What began as a professional relationship quickly evolved. Olivia and Lucia discovered a shared passion for the technical aspects of their crafts. Both women understood the patience required to capture perfection. Olivia through her restorations, Lucia through her lens. By early 2020, Lucia had become such a fixture at the gallery that Wesley offered her the renovated carriage house as a studio space, just steps away from the main building where Olivia worked. Through 2021 and 2022, the three became inseparable. Their collaboration reached its peak in January 2023 with Preserved in Time, an exhibition combining Lucia's photographs of restoration projects with Olivia's actual preserved pieces. The show broke attendance records for the gallery and cemented their reputation as Portland's artistic triumvirate. To the outside world, they appeared to be the perfect team. Wesley, the visionary gallery owner, Olivia, the gifted restorer, and Lucia, the innovative photographer. Their personal dynamics seemed as carefully curated as the artwork they showcased. Wesley and Olivia hosted dinner parties in their federal-style home on Danforth Street, while Lucia's studio became the late-night gathering spot for Portland's creative elite. But by the spring of 2023, the careful composition of their lives was beginning to show hairline cracks, the kind that only a trained restorer like Olivia would notice. And like the antique paintings she had spent her career saving, some damage once begun proves impossible to reverse. The first signs appeared in March 2023, subtle as the early stages of paint deterioration that Olivia had spent her career detecting. After 15 years of reading decay in ancient artworks, she knew that destruction rarely announced itself. It whispered. Wesley's changes began with his schedule. The man who had maintained clockwork precision in his gallery appearances for over a decade suddenly became unpredictable. March 15th, a missed dinner with potential donors. March 23rd, a rescheduled meeting with a prominent Boston collector. April 2nd, 3 hours unaccounted for between afternoon appointments. His phone became a source of constant distraction, always face down, always within reach. The notifications arrived at odd hours: 11:42 p.m., 1:15 a.m., 5:30 a.m. Private collection viewing read one message that flashed across his screen. Need to discuss acquisition details privately, said another. After 16 years in the art world, Olivia knew that legitimate deals rarely required such secrecy. Then there was Lucia. Her black Audi remained in the carriage house parking lot long after the gallery's closing time, its presence marked by the security logs Olivia had begun quietly monitoring. April 12th, logged out at 11:45 p.m. April 15th, 1:20 a.m. April 19th, midnight. The pattern emerged like a darkroom photograph, slowly revealing its secrets. But it was the unannounced visits that painted the clearest picture. On April 22nd, Olivia returned to the gallery at 9:15 p.m., citing a forgotten restoration tool. She found the main lights off, but heard voices from the basement archives, voices that quickly silenced at the sound of her heels on marble. Wesley emerged alone, his collar askew, speaking too loudly about a newly acquired Renaissance piece. 4 days later, she discovered Lucia's signature scent, Chanel No. 5, lingering in Wesley's private office at 7:30 a.m., hours before the photographer's usual arrival time. The same perfume Olivia had given her as a birthday gift in December. May began with a series of business trips, Wesley to New York, Lucia to Boston, their schedules mysteriously aligned. The private text messages increased. The late nights multiplied. And through it all, Olivia watched, cataloged, and preserved every detail with the same precision she applied to her restorations. On May 15th, during the gallery's spring showcase, Olivia observed their reflections in an antique mirror she was restoring. Wesley's hand lingering too long on Lucia's lower back, Lucia's eyes holding his gaze a moment past propriety. They didn't notice Olivia in the corner, her white conservation gloves stained with cleaning solution, her mind beginning to formulate a different kind of preservation project. "Everything okay, darling?" Wesley had asked that night, noting her silence during dinner. Olivia smiled, the same gentle smile she'd worn for years while examining damaged masterpieces. "Just thinking about my next restoration project," she replied. "I think it's going to be my most challenging work yet." By May 20th, Olivia had begun ordering specialized conservation materials in quantities that raised eyebrows among her suppliers. But then again, she had always been known for her elaborate restoration projects, and this one would be her masterpiece. May 27th, 2023, 10:45 p.m. The Thorn Gallery's basement had always been Olivia's sanctuary. The climate-controlled space housed her restoration projects, including her current challenge, a sprawling Victorian mural discovered behind layers of wallpaper during the mansion's renovation. Under the harsh conservation lights, she worked methodically, her latex-gloved hands carefully removing decades of grime from the delicate surface. The basement's old heating system created strange acoustics, a fact Olivia had noted years ago when installing her conservation equipment. Sound traveled through the ancient pipes and vents in unexpected ways, carrying whispers from one room to another. At 11:23 p.m., the first murmur reached her ears. Wesley's laugh, not his public laugh, but the soft, intimate one usually reserved for their private moments. "We can't keep meeting like this." Lucia's voice echoed through the vents. They were in Wesley's private archives, supposedly closed for renovation. Olivia's hands stilled on the mural, her restoration tool suspended mid-stroke. "The renovation gives us the perfect cover," Wesley replied. Olivia is too absorbed in her precious mural to notice anything else. The irony wasn't lost on Olivia. How she had spent years teaching Wesley about the importance of preservation, only to have him destroy everything they'd built. Her latex glove squeaked against the metal tool as her grip tightened. A section of the basement wall, weakened by recent water damage, had created a small gap between the restoration room and the archives. Through it, Olivia could see fragments of their interaction like a broken film reel. Wesley's hands in Lucia's hair, Lucia's camera abandoned on the antique desk, their bodies silhouetted against the archive's dim lighting. "I have something to show you," Lucia's voice again, followed by the sound of a laptop opening. "I've been documenting us, creating our own private collection." The glow from Lucia's laptop illuminated their faces as they scrolled through images. Secret moments captured through her photographer's eye. Stolen kisses in the gallery after hours, intimate embraces in the carriage house studio, their weekend business trips that were anything but business. Each photo timestamped, some dating back to February, 3 months of betrayal preserved in high resolution. At 11:47 p.m., Olivia's conservation light caught a fragment of shattered mirror on the floor, reflecting the scene like a cruel masterpiece. In that broken reflection, she watched Wesley kiss Lucia with the same tenderness he'd shown at their own wedding 6 years ago. Olivia's hands remained steady as she returned to her work on the mural, each gentle stroke removing layers of grime, revealing the image beneath, a Victorian scene of Judgment Day. By midnight, she had formulated the beginning of her own artistic vision, one that would require all her skills as a conservator. She worked until 2:15 a.m., restoring the mural with meticulous care, while below her conservation table, her phone silently recorded every whispered word, every damning sound from the archives. The next day, she would begin ordering additional preservation materials. After all, her next project would require specialized chemicals, the kind used for permanent conservation. "Time reveals all secrets," she whispered to herself as she packed up her tools, her voice lost in the hollow spaces of the basement. But sometimes secrets need a little help being preserved for posterity. Dawn broke on May 28th, 2023, finding Olivia in her private conservation studio, her eyes fixed on the computer screen as she typed, "Chemical interactions between organic matter and preservation compounds." Her browser history would later reveal a methodical progression: research papers on ancient Egyptian mummification techniques, studies on modern preservation methods, articles about toxic art materials used in Victorian paintings. To the outside world, nothing had changed. She attended gallery functions with practiced grace, her hands still perfectly steady as she held her wine glass at the May 30th donor reception. Wesley and Lucia are collaborating on an exciting new project, she told curious patrons who noticed their absences. Her smile never wavered, though her eyes had taken on the focused intensity she usually reserved for her most challenging restorations. Between June 1st and June 7th, she submitted 3 separate orders for conservation supplies to different vendors. Nothing unusual for a conservator preparing for a major project. 40 liters of specialized preservation solution from Cambridge, industrial-grade sealants from New York, chemical stabilizers from Boston. Each order carefully timed, each payment processed through the gallery's regular accounts. In her basement workspace, she began experimenting. Small tests at first, studying how different materials reacted to various preservation techniques. She logged everything in her conservation notebook, maintaining her lifelong habit of detailed documentation. June 10th, tested absorption rates. June 12th, analyzed crystallization patterns. June 15th, documented temperature effects on chemical bonds. Meanwhile, her phone continued recording. She compiled a digital archive that would rival Lucia's secret collection. Time-stamped security footage from the gallery, audio recordings from the basement, photographs of their cars parked in hidden spots around Portland. Each piece of evidence carefully preserved, like specimens in formaldehyde. June 18th marked the beginning of her most ambitious restoration project, the complete preservation of a life-sized Victorian statue group, requiring a custom-built containment structure in the gallery's main hall. The permit applications went through proper channels, the construction plans reviewed and approved. No one questioned why Portland's premier art restorer would need such an elaborate setup. "Your dedication to this project is remarkable," Wesley commented on June 22nd, watching her work late into the night. He couldn't see that her notes contained more than just conservation protocols. Between the lines of technical specifications lay calculations of body mass and chemical concentrations precisely measured like pigments for a masterpiece. By June 25th, she had perfected her technique through countless small-scale tests. The basement now housed dozens of preserved specimens, flowers, insects, small organic materials, each one teaching her something new about the intersection of preservation and decay. The police would later note how these experiments progressively increased in size and complexity. On June 28th, Olivia submitted her proposal for an installation piece to be unveiled at the Portland Summer Arts Festival. A study in preservation, she called it. The gallery board, led by an unsuspecting Wesley, enthusiastically approved. That evening, she watched through the basement's broken wall as Wesley and Lucia planned their art-buying trip for late July, unaware that their time could be measured in hours rather than months. "The key to perfect preservation," Olivia wrote in her journal that night, "is timing everything precisely." She had learned this through years of restoration work. Every chemical reaction, every layer of preservation had to be perfectly sequenced. As she closed her journal at 11:47 p.m., her phone recorded one final meeting between her husband and best friend in the archive room. It would be the last entry in her evidence collection. Tomorrow, she would begin preparing for her true masterpiece. The morning of June 29, 2023, arrived with an air of anticipation at the Thorne Gallery. Olivia had sent out a private invitation the night before. "Join me for an exclusive preview of my newest installation piece, a celebration of preservation techniques spanning centuries. 9 p.m., Conservation Studio." Her hands trembled slightly as she read and reread the message, not from fear, but from the weight of what was to come. Wesley and Lucia arrived separately, he at 8:57 p.m., she at 9:04 p.m., their attempted discretion now causing a bitter laugh to rise in Olivia's throat. The conservation studio had been transformed. Special lighting cast an ethereal glow across the space, illuminating vessels of preservation fluids that caught and refracted light like liquid gold. The air carried the sharp, clean scent of conservation chemicals, familiar to anyone who had spent time in restoration labs. "I've prepared something special," Olivia began, her voice deceptively calm as she poured them each a glass of champagne. "An exploration of preservation and betrayal." The last word hung in the air, causing both Wesley and Lucia to freeze mid-sip. "Oh, please, drink up," she continued, her own glass untouched. "It's a particular vintage, much like the photographs Lucia's been collecting." The color drained from Lucia's face. Wesley's hand tightened around his glass. "Shall we review your private collection?" Olivia's voice cracked as she pressed a button, projecting their secret photographs onto the studio wall. February 15th, the archive room. March 3rd, the carriage house. April 22nd. Her voice rose with each date, years of pain spilling out. "I restored our wedding photos, Wesley. Did you know that? Spent weeks preserving them while you were preserving moments with her." At 9:27 p.m., the first signs appeared. Wesley loosened his collar, complaining of the heat. Lucia's hand trembled as she set down her glass. "The human body," Olivia continued, tears streaming down her face as she pulled on her latex gloves, "is remarkably similar to canvas in terms of preservation needs. Temperature control, chemical balance, proper binding agents." She watched recognition dawn in their increasingly unfocused eyes. "The champagne you just drank contains the same compound I use to stabilize paintings for transport, though I must admit the dosage is quite different for human subjects." "Olivia, please," Wesley slurred, attempting to stand but finding his legs unresponsive. "We can explain." "Explain?" Her laugh was hollow. "Like you explained all those late nights, those business trips?" She moved closer, watching as Lucia slumped in her chair. "You know what the Victorians used in their most vibrant pigments? Arsenic. Beautiful but deadly, rather like the trust you both poisoned." By 9:45 p.m., they could only watch, paralyzed, as she moved around the studio, preparing her materials. "You'll be part of my greatest work," she whispered, wiping tears from her cheeks. "Preserved forever in the moment of your betrayal. Isn't that what you wanted, Lucia? To capture moments that last forever." At 10:15 p.m., as their breathing slowed, Olivia began the preservation process. Her movements were precise, practiced through months of preparation. "I loved you both," she said softly, positioning their bodies with artistic care. "Wesley, my husband. Lucia, my dearest friend. And now you'll be my masterpiece." She worked through the night with the same patience she applied to her restorations. Layer by layer, she transformed tragedy into art. The bodies were positioned to tell their story, reaching for each other even in death, a tableau of desire and deceit frozen in time. By 4:23 a.m. on June 30th, the first phase was complete. Over the next 2 weeks, as the gallery buzzed with questions about Wesley and Lucia's mysterious art-buying trip to Europe, Olivia constructed her installation around them. She built a complex structure of glass, metal, and preserved materials, a monument that would house her greatest work of conservation. The preservation process continued in stages, just as she had practiced. Each layer of chemicals added another dimension to her piece. The bodies became part of the art, indistinguishable from the other preserved materials she had incorporated into the installation. On July 14th, 2023, the day before the festival opening, Olivia applied the final sealant. Her installation stood complete, a towering testament to preservation, betrayal, and the fine line between art and atrocity. As she made her final notes in her conservation journal, her tears fell onto the page, smudging the ink. "Love, like art," she wrote in her final entry, "can be preserved forever, but sometimes preservation is just another form of revenge." The Portland Summer Arts Festival opened on July 15th, 2023, with Olivia Blackwood's installation as its centerpiece. Her eyes were dry now, all tears spent in private. She stood before the crowds in a black designer dress, speaking eloquently about the intersection of modern and ancient preservation techniques, about the permanence of art and the impermanence of human connection. "My husband would have loved to be here," she told reporters, her voice carrying just the right note of regret. "But you know Wesley, always chasing the next big discovery in Europe. He and Lucia are visiting private collections in Madrid this week." The lie rolled off her tongue with practiced ease, supported by carefully crafted email trails and social media posts scheduled months in advance. Critics fell over themselves praising the work. "Blackwood's most ambitious piece yet," declared the Portland Press Herald. "A haunting meditation on preservation and decay," wrote Artforum's online review. The emotional depth seems to seep from within the installation itself, noted the Boston Globe, an observation that nearly brought a smile to Olivia's carefully composed face. But by July 20th, the first whispers of concern began to circulate. Wesley hadn't called into the gallery's weekly board meeting, something he'd never missed in 15 years. Lucia's architecture clients reported canceled appointments, her assistant unable to reach her. Their social media accounts, usually active with art world updates, had grown suspiciously generic. Detective Maya Patel first visited the gallery on July 22nd, her art history degree making her uniquely qualified for what seemed like a routine missing persons inquiry. She noted the installation's unusual chemical smell, masked by expensive air fresheners. Her trained eye caught the subtle variations in texture, the strange density of certain sections. "Tell me about your preservation process," Patel asked Olivia during their third interview on July 25th. They stood before the installation, now the subject of international acclaim. Olivia launched into a detailed explanation of chemical compounds and ancient techniques, watching the detective's face for any sign of suspicion. "And Wesley approved all these materials?" Patel's question seemed innocent enough, but her eyes never left Olivia's face. "Wesley trusts my expertise implicitly," Olivia replied, emphasizing the present tense. "He always has." The detective's visits became more frequent as July drew to a close. She spent hours studying the gallery's security footage, reviewing supply orders, interviewing staff. But Olivia had planned for this. Every document perfect, every alibi constructed with the same precision she used in her restorations. Still, small details began to accumulate like dust on an ancient canvas. A maintenance worker mentioned the strange sounds from the conservation studio that late June night. A supplier questioned the unusual quantities of preservation chemicals. Wesley's sister in Boston reported increasingly suspicious text messages. By August 1st, international galleries were beginning to ask pointed questions about Wesley's extended absence. Lucia's family in Madrid confirmed she had never arrived for her supposed visit. Detective Patel's casual inquiries evolved into formal interviews, each question more pointed than the last. Yet Olivia maintained her composure, even as the summer heat began to test the limits of her preservation work. The installation remained the festival's main attraction, drawing crowds who stood for hours studying its intricate details, unaware they were witnessing both a work of art and a crime scene. "Art," Olivia told a group of admirers on August 3rd, "has a way of revealing its secrets in its own time." Above them, the gallery's aging air conditioning system struggled against the record-breaking heat, and somewhere within the installation, the first drops of preservation fluid began to shift. August 4th, 2023, brought Portland's highest temperature on record, 103 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside the Thorne Gallery, despite the straining air conditioning, the humidity crept up degree by degree. Olivia stood before her installation at 2:17 p.m., watching with growing horror as the first bead of dark liquid formed at its base. Too soon, too soon. Detective Patel chose that same afternoon to return, armed with a search warrant for Lucia's carriage house studio. Among the developed photographs hanging in the darkroom, she discovered a series that made her pause. Images of the gallery's basement, taken from angles that suggested intimate knowledge of the space. But it was what lay beneath these photographs that caught her eye. Earlier prints showing Wesley and Lucia together, dating back months before their disappearance. At 4:45 p.m., the gallery's humidity sensors triggered an alarm. Olivia rushed to adjust the environmental controls, but the damage had begun. Microscopic cracks appeared in the installation's surface, like age lines in an old painting. The preservation chemicals, destabilized by the heat, began to separate. "Miss Blackwood," Detective Patel called from the gallery entrance, "I believe we found something interesting in your restoration records." She held up a leather-bound journal, Olivia's private conservation notes. "Your supply orders for June show quantities sufficient to preserve something far larger than any artwork in the gallery's collection." The first drop fell at 5:23 p.m. Dark, viscous, it splattered on the marble floor with an accusatory tap. Olivia watched it fall, remembering how she had positioned Wesley's body that night, how his final words had been an apology, not for the affair, but for being caught. "The humidity is affecting the chemical balance," Olivia explained clinically, even as more drops began to fall. Art preservation is a delicate science. But Detective Patel was no longer listening. Her attention had shifted to a series of restored paintings along the gallery wall, works Olivia had completed in the weeks following Wesley and Lucia's disappearance. Under the detective's UV light, hidden messages emerged in the restoration work, dates, times, locations, all matching the timeline of the affair Olivia had so carefully documented. By 6 p.m., the installation's deterioration had accelerated. The summer heat had compromised the chemical bonds faster than even Olivia had anticipated. The gallery filled with a sickly sweet odor that no amount of air freshener could mask. "You documented everything, didn't you?" Patel said softly, holding up one of Lucia's photographs. "Just like she did. But you went further. You preserved it." At 6:17 p.m., a large section of the installation's outer layer sloughed away, revealing the horror beneath. Olivia made no move to stop it. Instead, she walked to her restoration table and picked up her conservation journal. "Did you know," she said, her voice steady even as tears began to fall, "that the Victorians used to take photographs of their dead loved ones? They called them memento mori, remembrances of death. I thought it fitting, given Lucia's passion for photography." The evidence emerged like layers of old varnish being stripped away. Wesley's phone, sealed in preservation fluid, still containing their messages. Lucia's camera, its memory card full of documented betrayal. And in Olivia's precise conservation notes, a detailed record of how she had transformed her husband and best friend into her final masterpiece. As police sirens wailed in the distance, Olivia stood before her disintegrating work. "I succeeded, she whispered to Detective Patel. "In all my years of restoration, I've never preserved anything as perfectly as I preserved their betrayal." The installation continued to weep its dark secrets onto the gallery floor, each drop marking the end of Olivia Blackwood's greatest and most terrible work of preservation. August 4th, 2023, 7:45 p.m. The Thorn Gallery's marble floors ran black with preservation fluid as Portland's finest art space became the city's most notorious crime scene. The summer heat had accomplished what months of scrutiny could not, revealing the true nature of Olivia Blackwood's final masterpiece. CSI technicians worked alongside art conservators, their unusual collaboration necessary to preserve evidence that was, quite literally, dissolving before their eyes. At 8:23 p.m., the first definitive identification was made. Wesley Thorne's gold wedding ring, still perfectly preserved, caught the light of police flashbulbs. Lucia's signature pendant emerged next, the metal untarnished by the chemicals that had failed to hold their flesh. Olivia sat calmly in the gallery office, watching the parade of experts through the Victorian windows. The humidity was always going to be the weakness, she explained to Detective Patel, her voice carrying the same educational tone she'd used in countless restoration lectures. Even the Egyptians couldn't prevent some deterioration. The investigation revealed a preparation so meticulous it bordered on artistry itself. Forensics teams discovered test subjects hidden throughout the basement. Progression studies, Olivia called them. Small organic materials leading up to larger specimens, each teaching her something new about the preservation process. She approached murder like a restoration project, the forensics expert testified later. Each step documented, each chemical reaction predicted and prepared for. The bodies were essentially turned into art materials through a process we've never seen before. The art world that had praised her work now provided the evidence for her conviction. Supply orders masked as restoration materials. Gallery funds used to purchase chemicals. Private collectors who remembered strange conversations about preservation techniques. Every connection Olivia had cultivated over her career became another strand in the web of evidence. But it was the trial, beginning January 15th, 2024, that became her true final performance. Art, Olivia addressed the court on opening day, choosing to represent herself, has always been about preservation. We preserve moments, emotions, truths. I simply took that mandate to its logical conclusion. She stood in a perfectly pressed black suit, her posture that of a lecturer rather than a defendant. Over 23 days, she transformed the courtroom into her gallery. Evidence became exhibitions. Cross-examinations became artist talks. She displayed her conservation notes like gallery placards, walking judge and jury through her process with professional detachment. "Consider the symmetry," she told the stunned courtroom on February 7th, "of preserving the very moment of betrayal. Wesley and Lucia wanted their affair documented, preserved in photographs. I merely granted their wish in a more permanent medium." The prosecution presented 847 pieces of evidence. Olivia treated each one like a curated artwork, providing context, explanation, artistic motivation. Even Detective Patel admitted a disturbing admiration for the thoroughness of her documentation. On February 12, 2024, as the jury delivered their verdict, Olivia stood like an artist at an opening, ready to receive reviews of her work. "For my final installation," she addressed the court one last time, "I preserved not just two bodies, but the moment trust died, when love calcified into revenge. What is art, after all, if not the truth made permanent?" The sentence was announced, life without parole. Olivia's only response was to smile and ask if her conservation journals could be donated to a museum. "Future generations should understand," she explained, "the fine line between preservation and destruction." The Thorn Gallery closed its doors permanently in March 2024, but in certain art circles, they still whisper about Olivia Blackwood's final masterpiece, the work that turned murder into art, and art into something darker still. December 31st, 2024. 1 year after Olivia Blackwood's conviction, Detective Maya Patel stands in the empty shell of what was once the Thorn Gallery. The Victorian mansion's windows are boarded up, but through the gaps, winter light still catches the marble floors where preservation fluid once ran like black tears. The Portland art scene has never quite recovered. The scandals, investigations, and revelations sent shockwaves through galleries across New England. Wealthy collectors quietly removed Wesley Thorn's acquisitions from their walls. Lucia Ramos's architectural photographs were taken down from municipal buildings. Every piece they'd touched became tainted by association. But Olivia's work, her legitimate restorations from before, have become macabrely valuable. Auction houses report unprecedented interest in paintings she preserved, each buyer hoping to find hidden messages in the layers of restoration. Her conservation journals, despite her wishes, were not donated to museums but sealed as evidence. Copies circulate in the art world's black market, commanding prices that rival the masterpieces she once restored. The installation site remains the most requested evidence viewing in Portland's criminal history, Detective Patel notes in her final case report. Art students, criminologists, and psychologists all want to study what they call the preservation murders. They're missing the point. This was never about preservation. It was about decay, the decay of trust, of love, of sanity. The Maine State Police Evidence Facility now houses what remains of Olivia's final work. Climate-controlled, carefully documented, the installation pieces are preserved with the same attention she once gave her art. The irony is not lost on the evidence technicians. In her cell at the Maine Correctional Center, Olivia continues to receive letters. Gallery owners seeking insights into her techniques. Art theorists asking about her methodology. True crime enthusiasts requesting interviews. She responds to none of them, but her influence grows in her silence. New security protocols have been implemented in conservation labs across the country. Art restoration supplies are now tracked like controlled substances. The Smithsonian has revised its chemical storage guidelines. Her case is studied in both forensics classes and art conservation programs. The legacy, Detective Patel writes in her memoir published late 2024, isn't in the murders themselves, but in how she transformed horror into art. She forced us to confront the thin line between preservation and destruction, between creation and obliteration. Every art restoration now carries a whisper of her story. The Portland Summer Arts Festival relocated to a new venue in 2024. But on humid summer days when the air grows thick with possibility, people still walk past the boarded-up Thorn Gallery. They pause, looking up at the Victorian windows, wondering if they can smell chemicals on the breeze. In her last recorded statement, given to the prison psychiatrist on December 15, 2024, Olivia simply said, "Every artist dreams of creating something permanent. I preserved not just bodies, but a moment of truth. Isn't that what art is supposed to do?" The Thorn Gallery will be demolished in spring 2025. The city plans to build a community arts center in its place. But the story of Olivia Blackwood's final exhibition lives on, in case files, in art history books, in whispered conversations at gallery openings. A cautionary tale about the length someone will go to preserve what's already been destroyed. In the end, perhaps Detective Patel says it best in her closing notes. Some art is meant to be preserved forever. Some truths are meant to decay. Olivia Blackwood's tragedy was in not knowing the difference.